Donald Trump is having a light week on the legal front, yet he was found liable in his second defamation suit. We'll unpack that ruling. Meanwhile, televised hearings started today in the Fulton County case, and the judge confirmed the trial itself will be live streamed via YouTube. We'll give you some takeaways from today's action and give the implications for the trial itself. Then DeSantis PAC is going to war with Vivek as new polling shows Ron on the decline and Ramaswamy gaining ground. Do we have a front runner for runner-up in the making? Finally, Democrats won a historic victory in Wisconsin earlier this year with a win in a key Supreme Court race. Now the state's GOP is moving to impeach that justice before she even begins her term. We'll assess this threat and what you can do about it. Welcome back to the podcast that helps you, the 54% of the country that votes for progress in every election, convince your conservative friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
All right, Jason. Well, fresh off the presses, Trump was found liable by a federal judge right before we sat to do this recording, or I'm standing, I guess, before I stood to do this recording. And you're a resident, sort of civil expert here. Do you have any idea what the posture of this is, like the second case relative to the first? I did my best to quickly get up to speed over the past 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's basically, in layman's terms, what happens in a case like this is you're allowed to, when something has already been litigated, right? And it's like, look, a jury has already ruled on this thing, and it's not like a new crime. It's just like, or not, it's not a crime in this case, like a new civil violation. And it's like, look, a jury and a judge already found him liable for doing this, and now he did the exact same thing again. There's no difference. All of these facts are the same. So you just sort of stipulate and basically transfer over the findings from the last court, and then the judge can decide whether or not you need a completely new evidentiary hearing, whether you need a completely new jury, or whether they're just going to say, yes, we're just basically transferring these findings over to this case. And then this stuff over here is what's still left to be argued about, and we'll leave that. But we're going to decide, we're going to consider this stuff here to be decided. And that's what happened here.
Got it. And so it looks like now it's just moving to damages, Jason. So he was already found liable for $5 million in damages in the earlier case. So now he's set to have a new hearing on just damages, and the jury will find, determine a new set of damages for him.
Yeah, I think that's basically it, because, if you remember, what happened is they did this case. He didn't really do much to defend himself, right? In the initial case, and because he didn't want to go to court and have to, I guess, politically, he didn't want to have to go in there and be like, no, here's how it is that I didn't sexually assault, right? So he kind of let it happen. And then this time, what he was found liable for was defamation, right? And then he came back and he defamed again, because immediately he was like, no, none of that's true. It's all bogus. And so it's just sort of like, well, yeah, that's the exact same facts, by calling her a liar and all that kind of thing. And so now they just got to decide, well, how much damage was done this time, and we'll see whether or not he puts up a fight. It's kind of hard to when his dance card's getting a little bit full when it comes to being in court, man.
Well, I actually was just watching the Fulton County hearings. So the judge there, Scott McAfee, he not only said a few days ago that he confirmed that they will be televising that trial whenever it begins via YouTube, a YouTube live stream, but also great revenue raiser for Fulton County. I hope they hold on to that YouTube live stream. But
no kidding, there's going to be a lot of pre-roll, man.
Yeah, do not outsource that, Fulton County. But
my God,
call me up. We're a nonprofit. We'll help you set it up. Don't let anybody in on that. But the second thing is, I think it'll rival Mr. Beast's account for the few months.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
But they also started the hearings today. So I was watching the hearings right before we went on. And Jason, there are a couple interesting things here. Number one was I watched as Ken Chesebro or Chesebro.
I don't know how you say his name. I have chosen to say it because I don't know. It's Chesebro.
Oh yeah. Well, his lawyer says Chesebro, which means that must be the real pronunciation. But shout out to Will Wooten, the prosecutor, who then proceeded to call him Chesebro, the prosecutor. So what I just watched, and understanding I don't fully understand everything that's going on in this hearing, I just watched as what it believed to be I'll be nice, Chesebro's lawyer tried to throw Sidney Powell under the bus, basically being like, look, her charges are crazy. Ours are very minimal. And then the judge was like, oh, say more. What do you think is like so severe about her charge relative to yours? And then I watched the lawyer backtrack, like, no. Like, I don't want to cause trouble here. I'm just saying my guy did something way more minimal than what she's being accused of. And so I'm basically watching as they're like basically starting to fight already, these lawyers amongst each other. And then basically he's trying to sever his case from the rest of the defendants. And then I watched Powell try to do the same exact thing. Her lawyer got up and tried to do the same thing. And so then I watched this guy, Will Wooten, get up and essentially be like, all right, like he basically laid out the state. I learned a lot about Georgia RICO law just now. He laid out the precedent in RICO. And Jason, let me tell you this. I don't ever want to be involved in a RICO case because I heard Will Wooten say, the prosecutor say, when you're accused under the RICO statute, evidence against one is evidence against all. And I'm like, yeah, I don't.
But that makes sense.
The crosshairs of that, yeah, it does. I could see why people have issues with these statutes. So when I was listening,
because it's a conspiracy statute. It's an organized crime statute, right? And so it also makes a lot of sense for why they want to be separate, because they're like, well, a lot of us did crimes, and I did the crimes assigned to me. I don't want credit for the crimes assigned to others. Right?
Yes.
And
so I guess how it works is relevance is a very is given a sort of broad reading in a RICO statute, right? So from what I understand, in a typical criminal trial, there's a tight rein on what's relevant or not. And in this case, but they still have to show you were part of the conspiracy. So that's the thing. So if majority 54 listeners, if your family members are like, this is wrong, yada, yada, the thing to keep reminding people is they still have to show that they were part of the conspiracy, right? They can't just be like, hey, we're going to drag you in court and anything goes, right? They're asking, are you part of this conspiracy? And then they're going to allow all evidence of that conspiracy to be presented at trial, right? But again, it is tricky. I'm not here to make their points for them, but when I think there's something 19 defendants in this case, my sense in watching this judge is that he's probably going to sever some of these defendants. I don't think he's going to sever Trump, but I think he's going to sever some of the defendants. And I actually think that's fine for people who have a particular bloodthirst for Trump. Don't worry about any of that. Trump, as long as Trump and the major conspirators are together, I think it will become obvious what they did. And in some ways, it's better that the weaker cases, the more minimal cases, get severed out, as long as it doesn't affect the calendar, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. I also think that what we're about to have happen is listeners of this show are about to be inundated with critiques of the RICO statutes. For sure. And the same way that, because the FBI is the one who has investigated a lot of the politically organized criminality. I just put crime in that twice with two roots, but whatever. Now they're like, we got to disband the FBI. Now they're going to say we got to get rid of RICO statutes. And I think it's just important to every few episodes do a quick reminder that the RICO statutes were created because of organized crime. Because you could, if you were an accountant for the mob, you could be like, look, they sent me the numbers and I put them in my sheet, and then I told them how much money they had left. That's not a crime. But they created the RICO statutes to be like, look, the accountant knew that these were numbers about dealing drugs or numbers about whatever.
Yeah, it's not meant to let's say, Pablo Escobar drops off his dry cleaning and somebody tailors, starches his shirts or something. But that's not what it's for his. You're right. It's for his accountant, not his dry cleaner. Yeah, and the accountant has to know something, right? You have to know you're part of the conspiracy. It's not. They're not just the Cali cartel is a good example, and Felix Gallardo, the Mexican, the sort of father of the current Mexican cartels. They were running legitimate businesses. It's not. Some of those people probably didn't even know they were working for a drug lord, right? And so it's not knowing actually is a defense to the statute. If you're just doing something that's not illegal and you didn't know, then you're fine. But that's not to say, like, look, if you're listening to this, use this as an opportunity to become familiar with RICO statutes. There's a lot of really interesting history of it, especially around the mob. There are a ton of great books. I talked about Fear City, which is the docu-series on Netflix before, which is like a really quick and very fascinating sort of entry point into it. It talks all about how in the 80s, prosecutors, including Giuliani, basically rediscovered the statute, which hadn't really been used. And that will ground you in a lot of history to give you a lot of, well, if not for the statute, like a lot of terrible things would happen in New York, right? Continue to happen. There were a couple other interesting things, though, that I saw here. A different prosecutor got up and said the trial will take 4 months, which I just thought was notable. I hadn't heard that number before, and said they plan to call 150 witnesses. And they were using this point to argue to the judge that it would be a logistical nightmare to try to choreograph all of this multiple times, and basically saying, let's just do it once and it will be easier for everybody. And so I hadn't seen that number before. Maybe it had been reported, but that was the other newsworthy thing I saw in the sort of short period of time I was watching these hearings.
That is a very long trial.
Yeah.
I did it. I did a 2-week trial once, and it damn near killed me. I mean, it was, I remember I was sleeping on the couch in the office, and that was 2 weeks, a 4-month trial. I mean, that is, and okay. How do you, switching gears for a second, how do you feel? Not as someone who we do this on YouTube and we are part of the Meidas Network. Let's set that aside and we are Democrats. Let's set all that aside for a minute. In just philosophically, how do we feel about the televising of trials?
Oh,
I'm curious where you're at on it. I'm not sure where I am.
Well, I love the content.
It's amazing to watch.
The OJ trial to me is
that's the first one I thought of.
One of the great moments in American history, and one of the worst moments at the same time. I err on the side of not televising trials. I think that there are just so few areas left in American society that are untouched by the digital realm and the like TV and all that I would want to keep certain places sacred. That said, I do think the current like default standard, which obviously is different in every state and everything, but there's a lot of places that will allow them in the public interest, right? Like if like some total layperson is tried for whatever, like there's not a lot of public interest in having a video camera there, but maybe this one there is. I don't know. I gotta watch it. There's also this Depp docuseries on Netflix, which I have not had a chance to see yet, which I think is like the ultimate version of spectacle when it comes to a trial. And I actually come into that without a lot of like knowledge, so maybe that'll help me solidify what I think about it, because from what I understand, that one is all about the sort of like public nature of that civil trial in that case. But what do you think? I actually don't have a strong opinion, I guess is my point.
I think I'm with you in that there is real value in 9 times out of 10, there is real value in maintaining the sanctuary of the courtroom for this reason. I believe there is value in having 2 separate institutions, whatever, however you want to put it, in the court of public opinion, which we all seem to exist in every single day, and it's nonstop, and it's a cycle, and it just goes on, and then the court of law. And to me, the advantage of not televising trials is that the whole concept of a criminal or a civil trial is to have people in that community come together and determine what the community standard is and what the community's interpretation of the law and of ultimately the instructions to the jury are. And even with the sequestering of juries, and let's be honest, over 4 months, and when you're trying a former president of the United States and all sorts of other high profile public officials, how successful can you really be in sequestering a jury for 4 months? I think it changes who the audience is or who the jury is. I think it widens the jury pool in a way that's not necessarily good, because it brings influences upon the jury, like cultural, popular culture influences, political influences that you want to do your best to avoid. So in general, I think it's not a good thing. Now, on the other hand, I think that there's something really great about airing things out and letting people see all of it, and letting people connect with the justice system and that sort of thing. And I think that there's something on a day-to-day basis. Like if you were just, let's say, because there are some courts that just like, it's like your local city council channel. Like they just have the camera on all the time. I think that there can be something good about that, about accountability when it comes to racial equality and the way judges treat defendants and that sort of thing. But in general, I'm against it. Now, when it comes to something that concerns the entire country, like our democracy, then it's a much harder call for me,
Right.
whether or not it's good or bad. And I think ultimately we're not going to know whether it's been good or bad for our democracy until we've done this and had it live streamed on YouTube so that people can see the entire process.
Yeah, I think about it from the perspective of journalism. It certainly helps, right? Like for example, the Rittenhouse case, if you remember, that was just as I was starting the branch. Back then it was called Lost Debate, and they were streaming every moment of that trial. And it was actually through watching the mundane moments that I realized this guy was going to get off. And I think like that wouldn't have been obvious from the coverage because the coverage was so charged. Like that you'd have to like really work hard to figure out what's going on in this case. But if you watched it, just from a strictly objective legal perspective, you're like, all right, one side is winning over both this judge and probably this jury. And also it was very informative. Like you're just watching it like, wow, okay. Like as somebody who likes to cover legal events, there was a lot of ins and outs of that, the mundanity, which I guess is a new word of that was, I thought, really helpful. There is a precedent here too. Like if you go back to colonial times, trials were open. If you remember the HBO docu-series on John Adams, he wound up defending British soldiers in a massacre. And if you remember the scene, he's in the gap. There's like the whole town shows up and is like yelling at him, and they're asking him questions during the trial. Just people who show up to the trial. Now, I imagine that was based on some kind of historical reality, because my understanding is that trials were, and this was not necessarily a good thing, but just coming from the precedents, it's coming from very communal, public, interactive things back in the day.
Well, and that's also, when you really think about it, at this point, so much of American style democracy, democratic republic, however you want to talk about it, has been replicated or even modified, in some cases improved by other nations. There are not a lot of pieces left that you can point to and go, that is so uniquely American. But the way that we try cases, or just the fact that there's an amendment in the U.S. Constitution that I think it's the 7th Amendment, is it 6th or 7th? I can't remember, that says that I think it's any case where the controversy is above $20, you get a civil trial, right? Like, that stuff is really unique. And so on the one hand, you want to put that on display. On the one hand, you want the whole country to be able to participate in that. But on the other hand, what's so unique and special about it is that it is an individual community coming together and pulling together just a group of citizens for jury duty to decide someone's fate. And so I'm of two minds, and we can move on, but it's an interesting thought experiment. Now, with all that said, I'm super excited. Now let's just putting on like a partisan hat, like for a moment, not even partisan hat, a pro-democracy hat, like team democracy. The idea that the nominee who is most opposed to democracy will spend a good amount of the campaign in a televised trial about his attempt to thwart democracy. I think that's good for the country.
Can I zag though on this one? Sure. I actually think it would have been better if it weren't televised, because wouldn't it even be better if he was forced to stand trial and be out of the public eye? Because like he loves the public eye. So like, what if we were just like, hey, we're going to lock you in a room for a month?
That's true.
4 months. It was maybe this, presumably this will be coming on the heels of a federal trial. We'll have to, which is not going to be televised from what I understand. They don't televise any federal trials. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this would be the ultimate death sentence for him as a public official. He loves the attention, right? And so there's part of me that actually thinks that would have been even better. I don't know. That's my zag. That's my Stephen A. Smith hot take.
It's a good point, because it's also weird to think about the idea that if he has a good day or a good moment in court, it could be good for his poll numbers.
It just becomes about the wild. Yeah, you know what's going to happen. He's going to wind up like, getting contempt of court stuff, forcing the hand of the judge to, have to throw the former president in jail and make the judge look like he's biased. Like, we know all the moves that are coming. You also know that MAGA sphere they're all going to become Clarence Darrow, and they're going to be like looking at every motion, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, like they're going to be citing like, like Marbury versus Madison, and it's just going to be the most annoying spectacle of all time. And I think like it's going to be Rittenhouse on steroids, like this is going to be the whole MAGA is going to show up here for these moments. And I think it's incumbent upon us,
It's a great point that a lot of people who just got done becoming scientists during COVID in a real big hurry are about to become legal scholars in a real big hurry. That will test our patience.
Yeah, well, a lot of those people have now experienced this, and they can dust off their law library from the Rittenhouse case and Johnny Depp versus Heard. Like, I mean, it's actually a sad world that a lot of these people like are now people like like they have their own channels. People are like asking their opinion. Most people have never even stepped foot in a courtroom or in a law school or read a legal brief, but such is America. All right. Well, okay. Enough of court TV for today. By the way, this was the light week for Trump. I just want to point out to everybody, this is what it looks like. Just settling. This may be the lightest week we ever see, save for like the holidays, And
Adam just sent us this message, this breaking news message, that Judge McAfee just denied Ken Chesebro and Sidney Powell's efforts to sever their cases. So
there we go.
He's not even severing those ones.
I'll tell you that the body language doctor likes what we're seeing from this judge. I won't say more.
Yeah,
but I'm liking what I'm seeing from him. This is the beauty of the televised court hearing, and I think he's going to give the MAGAsphere very little. He doesn't say a lot, and he generally asks good questions. So, okay. DeSantis versus Vivek Ramaswamy. Jason, Jeff Rowe.
I do.
So tell me a little bit about who Jeff. Let's acquaint the audience with who Jeff Rowe is, and also, like what is going on with this PAC now, which seems to be making one mistake after another.
Well, let's go through this news story, right? Yeah. So, Jeff Rowe is the top strategist for Ron DeSantis for his super PAC, and I guess just before the GOP debate, he did like a briefing for donors, which is not unusual at all, right? He did a briefing for donors, and during that, he bragged that the super PAC was behind an avalanche of opposition research targeting Vivek Ramaswamy. He said, everything you read about him is from us. He's the leader of the Never Back Down PAC, and he said every misstatement, every 360 he's conducting or 180 that he's going through in life is from our scrutiny and pressure, and so he's not going to go through that very well, and that will get worse for him. And so this was him doing a Q&A with folks just before that. He also, by the way, predicted during that briefing that Ramaswamy would have a big night, and he said that's not great for us in the short term, us being DeSantis. So who is Jeff Rowe? Because I didn't even realize that Jeff Rowe was, I know he's working at the super PAC, but that basically makes him one of the chief, at least media strategists for DeSantis. Okay, I have known Jeff Rowe a long time. Jeff Rowe comes out of Kansas City politics, and he is the Republican from Missouri and particularly from Kansas City, going back a long time. His firm Axiom Strategies ran campaigns against me for actually, I think every office that I pursued. With the exception of when I was running for mayor for a little while, although maybe he was in that, I can't remember. Maybe he was. I think Axiom Strategies was working for somebody in that. But anyway, but in addition to that, I got to know Jeff like on a personal level because I did a fellowship teaching at the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, where Axelrod had his fellowship program. And so David Axelrod invited me up to do that. And that same semester, he invited Jeff Rowe. And so Jeff Rowe and we saw each other a few times up there, had lunch. I had the very unique experience of hanging out late one night at Axe's apartment with a few people, including Jeff Rowe, and sitting there and having drinks and listening
By
to.
the way, does Axe still live at the top of the Oprah building?
I think he moved.
Oh, okay.
I think he moved. And I think he's mostly in Michigan lately and Arizona. But I think he's still got the place. It's a very nice condo. And so sitting there and having drinks and listening to these two like professionals, like campaign pros, Axe and Rowe, just talk. And what was so interesting was there wasn't any arguing. Like it was just, oh yeah, that, and this like fascination, mutual fascination in each other's craft, especially as a guy who had been on the receiving end. I mean, like I've seen lots of TV ads and mailers and stuff that were crafted by Rowe against me. And at this point, like Rowe and
he has a rep, right? He has a rep as being very good. He was Ted Cruz's guy, right? Which makes this behavior very strange, I think, with this.
Well, he has a rep as being very, very effective, but also the most bare knuckles dude that you will meet. Like Jeff Rowe, before it was cool to feel like when Trump came along and it was like there are no rules anymore. Right. Jeff Rowe always believed there were no rules. Like Jeff Rowe will openly tell you stories about, back in the early 90s when he was helping out on congressional campaigns in like north of Kansas City, up in Northwest Missouri, where he would just himself just hide in the bushes outside a candidate's like house and take photos, and like crazy stories. And then he was known before trackers were a thing. Jeff Rowe was the guy who like pioneered the idea of like, let's just have somebody with a camera go get in their face and see if they react poorly. And it worked several times where candidates would get freaked out and hit somebody because they were like, why is this person up in my face?
By the way, people are listening, getting mad at this. This is stuff that we rarely use the word both sides on this podcast, but this stuff is fair game at this point in politics in both sides of the aisle. What you're describing. Yeah. It
just started mostly on the right with guys like Rowe. And so anyway, my point in all this is saying that, do I think Jeff Rowe particularly cares that this leaked out? I really don't. I don't, because at this point, like, I think Jeff Rowe's approach to this kind of stuff, and I haven't talked to Jeff about this, but I think it's kind of like, at this point, who wouldn't assume that we thought Ramaswamy was moving up? And at this point, he probably likes the idea of people anticipating the dirt that's going to come, because it'll accentuate it. Because if people anticipate it and they look for it, they're more likely to react to it and go, oh yeah, that is, as opposed to just letting it pass by them. They're now keyed to it and they're looking for it. Rowe told me once, I was just going to say the level of this, the level that he zooms in on this stuff is when my latest book came out last year, somebody at the University of Chicago who had been a part of the program we were in circulated it to all of us who were fellows in that program. And it was people like me, Kathleen Sebelius, Karen Tumulty, and like Jeff Rowe. Like it was people all over the a really renowned French political journalist, like just a real wide swath. And so there's a lot of collegiality. And so somebody sent it around and everybody's like, oh, congratulations, Jason. And then Jeff came in and he replied all. And he was like, I actually really look forward to reading this one because I had to read your last one in 24 hours after you pulled even in the polls with Roy Blunt. And we were like, oh, I actually have to develop as much opposition research on this guy as I possibly can. And he was like, so I read the other one really fast looking for ways to dislike you. I look forward to reading this as a normal person. So, the guy doesn't really miss much.
What's fascinating? Well, this came out, if people remember, right? This was happening all at the same time that Rowe leaked the debate memo, which I think had to have been an error, because I think people are saying, all right, well, they were telegraphing to the DeSantis campaign what to do, but I'm getting like the problem here is like the vibes are Rowe is becoming the story, the PAC is becoming the story, and Rowe could think this is a good strategy. I don't think it is, and it gives Ramaswamy like such an obvious comeback, which is it already actually happened in the debate. But anytime DeSantis attacks him, Ramaswamy is going to point to this PAC, and it's actually part of Ramaswamy's very, very thin and not genuine, like sort of story, but one that seems to be working with the GOP electorate to a certain extent, which we'll talk about, which is that he is independent of special interests. This is what he's saying, right? So he's saying all the rest of you aren't rich like me. So I could self-fund and I could do like, I don't have to like beg from rich donors and be beholden to them and engage in all this dark money politics. And then he makes that the story. That's the simple story. They could say whatever they want about Ramaswamy, how he made his money, different things he said. But in the end, he's going to have a tried and true comeback that is going to be more memorable than any of the attacks that happen against him, perhaps, unless those attacks are really crazy. And that question is, well, where are those attacks, right? Like, if this was what Roe was saying, right, you know, the clock is ticking, right? With each week that Ramaswamy gains little ground here, little ground there, he becomes the story, and attention is the currency of these campaigns. Like, you know, as we'll get to, like DeSantis, if he starts dropping, Ramaswamy starts rising, like, there's no guarantee that DeSantis will ever regain that ground, never mind make up the ground he had to make to even get near Trump.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that leaked is one of the things Roe said. And look, I know I sound like this Roe fan.
I know what's going on here.
No, look, I'm like, it's like respect your enemy, you know, respect, or I'll say adversary. Like Jeff Roe has put out some horrible things about me that were untrue, and he's been a part of that. And, you know, but he's very good at it. And like, you know, you gotta, if you go in thinking Darth Vader ain't nothing, like Darth Vader's gonna whoop you. And so you have to respect the talent that he brings to it, even if it is a talent that you fundamentally believe is in the furtherance of something really, really horrible, which I do. Now, one of the things Roe said and was leaked was he said, look, the campaign doesn't really start at all until after Labor Day. Like that's the real starting pistol. So I'm going to be interested to see, because this is what it did. It piqued our interest. What comes out about Ramaswamy from the Never Back Down Super PAC in the next few weeks? Because
tomorrow would be a day then. Well, when this podcast drops, right? Because it would be the first Thursday, which is the best day to drop anything. It would be the first Thursday after Labor Day. So I guess we'll start to see what that means. All right. Well, we're going to take a break and hear from our sponsor. And when we come back, we're going to look at some polling from the race. Like where does the race stand now? There's been some movement since the last time we talked about this. Then we're going to talk about a truly horrific effort by the Wisconsin GOP to undo the will of the electorate. All of this and more when we come back. Our next partner is AG1, the daily foundational nutritional supplement that I've been taking long before they sponsored this podcast. I drink it literally every day. And I gave AG1 a try because I was tired of taking so many supplements, so many vitamins, and I wanted to just find one solution that would support me throughout the day. I also wanted better gut health, a boost in my energy. I wanted to support my immune system. And what I particularly love about AG1 is that you get more bang for your buck. You don't have to buy all this junk and you don't have to spend all this time taking all this different stuff. You get this one scoop that you put in water. It tastes really great. I take it in the morning and I'll take another one in the afternoon if I'm particularly busy or if I'm traveling. And for me, it's become my go-to. I've even replaced my first cup of coffee in the morning with AG1. And since I've been taking AG1, I've noticed like a huge boost in my energy and my mood, my mental clarity, and I can't recommend it enough. So if you're looking for a simpler, effective investment to your health, try AG1 and you'll get 5 free AG1 travel packs and a free 1-year supply of vitamin D with your first purchase. You can go to drinkag1.com/majority. That's drinkag1.com/majority to check it out. All right, Jason. Well, the Wall Street Journal just came out with a poll that showed Trump holding steady. DeSantis is down. Vivek, Haley, and Christie are all up. And the fine print here is really interesting. So Trump has 59% of surveyed voters. This is a national poll. This is a 46-point lead over his next closest rival, which is Ron DeSantis. DeSantis was only down 13 points to Trump in April, right before he launched his candidacy. So he is going in the wrong direction. And
never meet your heroes. You know, right? that's the lesson.
Oh my God, I've got lots of stories of that. DeSantis's favorability also fell since the April survey. And this is, Republicans. So dropping from 84% to 70%. Trump's favorability also fell from 78 to 75% between the same two polls. And there was some not so great news here on the general election front. If the election were held today, Trump and Biden, the two are even at 46%, with 8% saying undecided. If you add a third party choice in there, Trump leads Biden 40 to 39 within the margin of error. If you add third parties, but I guess like unnamed third parties. And so you've got 8% for Nikki Haley, 5% for Ramaswamy, 3% for Christie. What I find notable is that we've got all this Vivek conversation, and we're guilty of it. He's a fun guy to make fun of. The real news here is the 8% to Haley, I think. Not that any of this is going to matter, but like the 8% to Haley seems to be the real story.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like if you watched that, if you remember the clip of the focus group that said that they really liked Vivek after the debate, the number 2 person they really liked was Haley. And I have to assume that that's just sort of people who are like, you're just regular Republicans who want, and I'm not saying like Republicans like what used to be Republicans, because that's mostly gone now. I'm saying people who are like, they're way more Republican than they are a fan of Trump, and they were Republican before Trump, but Trump can't drive them out of the Republican Party, right? So they're just like, they believe all the Republican things, and that's sort of what Nikki Haley offers. She's not more moderate. She's just like, like if Trump didn't exist and somebody were to say to you, well, there's this candidate. She's the former governor of South Carolina. She presents very well. Like, she's very articulate. She makes a great case. She's, the child of immigrants. She was the United Nations ambassador. She's a woman. Her husband is deployed for the military right now. You'd be like, oh my God, did they create this Republican candidate
she would be a shoo-in for the 2008 nomination.
Exactly. Right. Like that's exactly it. And the people who are like, it turns out 8% of Republican primary voters liked that. They liked John McCain and they liked Mitt Romney, and they were the same people. They probably voted for McCain in 2008 and Romney in 2012. And I don't know who they voted for in 2016 or 20, and in 2020, there was no real primary, but that's, I think, probably the Haley person, and 8% is not going to get it done. And that's kind of sad. How about I was just going to say, like, it blows my mind that he's still at 59% in like a 10-person field. That's unbelievable.
I mean, we have to take a step back and be like, what would a year from us versions of ourselves be saying about us when we talk about this, which is, you're talking about 8%. Like, it's like, what is the story? The story is the 59%. That's the story, exactly. Right? Obviously, we're podcasting audience. We want, we're all trying to make this more interesting than it probably really is. Like it's like, the 20th Ringer podcast about the draft, before it happens, like the 17th mock draft.
Or just 3 p.m. on MSNBC or CNN or Fox. Yeah. It's just like, we've already talked about everything. Okay.
That's the story.
But
the story is 59%.
That is the story. And the other piece of this that I think is so interesting, though, is DeSantis, which is, it is fascinating to think about the fact that the best thing he could have done for his campaign for president was not announce.
Not announce, but now what's the best thing he could do? Stop campaigning. Per my point last week, the best thing he could do is go back to Florida. I realize I'm shaking as I hit this little standing desk I have, but the best thing he could do right now is go down to Florida, stay down there, basically be around for hurricane season, get done whatever wacky shit that he needs to get done that he can then sell to Republican voters. Cancel, another AP course for whatever minority he hasn't gone after next. Replace the boards of directors of, public colleges, whatever stuff gets him back into the groove, and that can make him the guy of governing, and then reemerge. And then his sort of frame should be to Vivek, to the extent that this is even, it's so silly that this is what we're talking about, but it's to be like, I'm about governing. Like, to the extent that those two are fighting it out, it'd be like, look, like you are out there, like you have the luxury of going out there and just politicking full time. I had to go help people, right? You know, save them from Asian American studies or whatever comes next. You know, so that's what I would be doing if I were him. Less Ron DeSantis is more Ron DeSantis to their equation.
And at some point, you got to take the hint that the more people know you, the less they like you, and maybe this isn't the line of work for you. Right. You know, it's got to be real. I mean, like, that's got to hurt your feelings. You know, like the idea of me was far superior to the reality of me. That's rough, man. That's rough.
But we need to name this segment, but we just can't let a week go by without at least showing one clip of how just weird and just craven Vivek Ramaswamy is on the trail. Let's go to this clip where he was asked whether Putin is a war criminal.
Yes or no, do you Putin as a war criminal?
I think that Putin is a dictator, and I think that there are open questions that need to be adjudicated by the ICCJ. We have an ICCJ for a reason. My job as the U.S. president is to advance American interests. So I think Putin's actions have been craven. Not much I will say, and I've said it all along.
But do you believe he's a war criminal?
We have to get the facts before we get to the bottom of that.
So this was interesting for reasons that I think a lot of people might miss, which is they're like, oh, you can't call Putin a war criminal, yada, yada, yada. Look, actually, that's actually very complicated because actually when I think it was Biden called him a war criminal before, like it actually creates issues that actually would make it harder to unwind this war because of international jurisdiction around war crime. So basically you need to like leave the door open for Putin so that he can retreat and save face to his people, right? And if he can't travel internationally because he's going to be subject to the criminal proceedings, that at least is an interesting argument. I would still call him a war criminal, but at least there's a debate around that, even for people who want to back Ukraine fully. What's interesting is the guy is so clueless that he doesn't know that the ICC is just absolute kryptonite in Republican circles. Like he's like, oh, we gotta like he's just throwing out. And for listeners, the ICC is the International Criminal Court. The U.S. is not a member of the ICC because it erodes our sovereignty. This is a big thing, you know, especially to Republicans. But by and large, America is America. We don't like to cede our authority to anybody because there will be American leaders like, you know, George W. Bush, right? Like
right, George W. Bush, 100%.
You know, so this is a big no-no. I then listened to John Bolton came on right after this interview, and it was so funny to listen to because Bolton was basically one of those guys from what I could gather in this interview. I haven't done a deep dive on Bolton. This is a former UN ambassador and national security advisor, but also hates Trump. Is that he like basically hates, from what I can gather,
didn't know what to do,
our support of Ukraine war. But he was like, but this guy is ignorant. He's so the ICC, and then he blasted him over the ICC and was basically like, this guy's like Trump light. And I'm like, wow, I don't even know how to wrap my head around this as a quote unquote controversy. Is that the controversy is like 20 layers deep. But I just find it interesting because look, like if we're gonna do, you know, Ramaswamy corner, we gotta get meta on this kind of stuff. So I felt like this was like a more interesting gaffe than some of the previous ones that we talked about.
Well, what's fascinating is there's a way to watch that clip and interpret it as he's actually trying to be responsible, which is what you started with, right?
Yeah.
Which the idea that, you know, Biden did by calling him a war criminal, which of course the guy's a war criminal, right? But if you're the president and you call someone who you're trying to get them to stop a war criminal, well, what you're basically doing is you're being like, you have to win the war or there's going to be criminal liability for you. Right. And so it does make it harder to end the war. But I am not at the point where I will give Vivek Ramaswamy benefit of the doubt on anything like that, because I don't see this guy, the guy who's out there with his 10 truths and all this stuff, as a guy who's trying to say things in a way that are presidential and leave him room to do what's right for the country. This is a dude who goes back to something that a politician once said to me, which is, you got to win the division before you can win the pennant, and you got to win the pennant before you can win the series. This is a dude who's trying to win his division, right? And so the idea that he's trying to be that nuanced, I think, is unlikely, because if he was, I think you wouldn't then miss the opportunity to hit Biden, right? Because you would say, well, look, that question is a sticky one, because as you may remember, President Biden caused a lot of problems when he did this. And I'm not going to make that mistake. And then you say,
Right.
But
Yeah.
if you look at the facts, clearly then if the rest of what he said was the same, he's craven, he's a dictator, all those things, well, then you would understand him to be saying, yes, he's a war criminal. But if I'm president and I say that, it'll make it harder for the war to end. But he left that out. And I just think if he were earnestly trying to do that, that's how you would do it.
Right. Well, here's what's going on with him. He's got to be Mr. Smart Guy. So he wants the interviewer to know he knows what the ICC is.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
what he wound up doing is letting them know he kind of doesn't know what it is on a deeper level. But okay, let's talk about this. Let's go to the state level here. Wisconsin, this is a very distressing story here. So we talked about back when the election happened that Democrats flipped a key Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. Now, because of that election, we're poised to have a 4-3 majority, which is really important because it allows that court to overthrow state legislative maps that are just incredibly aggressively drawn for Republicans. And it also has implications for reproductive freedom and just protection of democracy and Lord knows what else. And Jason, there's all of this smoke around Republicans. They're starting to talk about impeaching this judge because she, basically made like very forward statements about how she feels about gerrymandering and reproductive rights while campaigning for this seat. Do you think they're going to go forward with this? Because they basically have full control over impeaching this judge.
If they have the votes, they're going to do it. And it wouldn't matter what she said during the campaign. And I think that the way people need to talk about this, stuff like this, with the conservative people in their lives, is the difference between doing things because they're right and doing things because you have the power to do them. And they're, whether it's true or not, we have this nostalgic belief that in this country, major things were more often decided on the merits of them, or at least that there was a respect for certain institutions, right? Like elections. Like if you lost one, you started trying to win the next one instead of trying to relitigate literally and figuratively and rerun the last one, because the country can't get anything done when you're doing that. But so I think the way to approach this with people is that if all anybody cares about, and if the only point of any of this governing that's going on is to gain power and to use power, then what is good about American democracy? How is it going to work? And so I think this is a symptom of a larger thing, which is they believe in power for power's sake. And while this is terrible, and I am fully against anything like this, it does lead toward a little bit of a lesson that Democrats need to learn, which is you have to use power when you have it, because if you don't, the other side will. This is an abuse of power, but
this is an example of the power laws of democracy and how they could be dangerous, right? So Wisconsin is a seat that Democrats win more often than they lose. We have the governor's seat, we won the presidency more often than not, right? And we could be generous and call it a 50-50 state. Republicans have a 29 seat majority in the state assembly. Now, this is the very issue that we're talking about, drawing maps, right? So they're using their power, which is illegitimate, to protect their illegitimate power. And this is where it gets really dangerous. They also have a 2/3 majority in the state Senate. And now this is where things get dicey. Upon impeachment, I'm going to read from this article that we have about this, and let me give credit where credit is due. This is from the New York Times. So upon impeachment, a Supreme Court justice would be prohibited under the state constitution participating in and voting on court decisions. If the state Senate voted to convict and remove the justice before December 1st, Governor Evers, a Democrat, would name a replacement who would face voters next April when the Republican presidential primary will be on the ballot, meaning that conservative voters would be highly energized. So, and by the way, the fine print here, Wisconsin Constitution stipulates that impeachment is intended for, quote, corrupt conduct in office or the commission of a crime or misdemeanor, none of which is alleged here. So
right. They're just like saying she said, we don't like what she said in the campaign. I mean, it is absolutely, we're going to replace the will of voters. You know, before photo ID, for instance, became as partisan and became such a Rorschach test, back when not everybody really knew what it was, I remember when I was Secretary of State talking to Republican voters and saying, look, I just think that every eligible voter should have every opportunity to vote. And then whoever's idea is the best wins. And that's why I opposed photo ID. And when I would have those conversations, most Republican voters would say, I agree. If my side doesn't have the better argument, then we shouldn't win. Now, that issue has become a Rorschach test, that it's been polluted, so it no longer applies there. But when you take most of these issues, it's like, that's where I think most voters start. And so on something like this, if you were to explain to people, well, look, they have a way outsized presence already in the legislature, and this is about them abusing their power. It is not really about this judge. Most voters, even Republican voters probably in Wisconsin, are going to be like, yeah, I don't think we should do that. I think we should just try to win elections. And I think we've got to continue to make that argument.
Right. Well, okay. Shout out to the Wisconsin Democratic Party. We've had Ben on, who's the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, Ben Wickler. And they, look, I wouldn't put it past the Democrats if they were forced to, getting, especially if the Republican primary is a shoo-in by that point, like, stepping up one more time and getting people out to win in April. Yeah. But let's hope that we don't, they don't have a reason to, because they fought really hard for that win. And I mean, this would be truly insane.
All right. So that's the news. You had your first tennis tournament. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So okay. Reminder, I have the Pura Vida Open this coming weekend, which is the one where I'm playing my friend, and the stakes are whoever loses this tennis match gets a tattoo on their butt. So obviously I've been training very hard. I participated in my first tennis tournament this weekend at Prospect Park, and I made it to the quarterfinals. It was great.
Amazing.
And it was. I played this guy in the match before the quarterfinals, which was the best sporting performance of my adult life. Like, literally what happens is you go there and you're like warming up, and he starts like serve practicing. And it was the fastest serve I've ever seen in my life. And so at that point, I just was like, all right, it's been a great run. Right. And I wound up going a couple games down, and it's like a 1-set match essentially at the early rounds. And so but then I started to figure out how to hit this thing back, and I was just on all cylinders. The other thing I was doing was I was complimenting him throughout, because you have to
switch sides. Psychological warfare.
So there's two things complimenting does. One is it calms you down, because like if you see a lot of tennis players, they get all mad and yada yada yada, like they're all mad at themselves, they get negative and all that. But by complimenting him, it kind of calms me down. And two is it really fucked with him. He was annoyed by it, but he couldn't really get mad at me, because I told him before, I was like, look, this is my first thing. I'm like new. I've only been playing for a year and a half. And he was basically like, all right, kid, like, sure, this will be fine. So he's like, I've kind of set up this thing where I'm just like, I'm happy to be here. Right. And I'm just being really nice to him. But he got so mad at me. You could just tell as it was going on. And then especially as I had to like win like 3 games in a row in order to win at the end. And by the time we got to this tie break, I had to beat him on a tie break. He was like, I had to get out of there pretty fast.
He's like, I can't believe I'm losing to this new guy.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, so it was great. Amazing. And then I wound up getting my butt kicked in the quarters. But then it was a great run. It was a great debut. And then I went to the U.S. Open this weekend. So I saw Alcaraz, and I saw the Bills owner's daughter play, who is ranked 3 in the world. And then I saw the coolest thing with the U.S. Open, by the way, is I
love how, like, to you, because you're such a Bills fan, her full name is the Bills owner's daughter.
Yeah, well, there were people in Bills gear, by the way, in the stadium. Jessica Pugula, she's a great athlete in her own right. I suspect that some portion of her success has something to do with the billions of dollars that they have to give her everything she needs to succeed. But look, we're all privileged.
Still did it. Yeah.
But the coolest thing is they let you go to the practice sessions if you go to the U.S. Open, right? Which is an underrated part of it. So I watched Djokovic practice, and then I watched Sabalenka, who's now the new world #1 woman, practice. And just from the perspective of like the love of like learning new things and the mechanics of stuff, that was honestly the highlight. It was like so cool to see what their routine is for practice.
It's a really interesting point. Well, it's a really interesting point you made about it calms you down to compliment them, because I realized I do that like when I'm batting and the guy throws like a really nice curveball that like I don't I don't swing because I think it's coming at me, and then like it curves in. Instead of like being all upset, like I'll turn to the catcher and I'll be like, damn, that was a really nice pitch. And which is two things. One, it's me reminding myself like, hey, this is fun. I'm a 42-year-old man. I'm out here playing baseball. Like, let's remember it's a game. And two, it makes it more likely that they don't throw it again because the catcher's thinking, okay, well, he's watching for that one. But I think that's great. My grown-up sport competitive thing for this week is that, my right shoulder and my right elbow at this point are really messed up, and I'm going to see a doctor tomorrow, and I've been doing physical therapy. Well, my rotator cuff is either inflamed or partially torn, and my UCL in my elbow is either partially or fully torn. So
have you done an MRI yet on it?
I'm getting it in the next few days probably. Yeah. And so we're going to know more. But point being, like, it's very hard to throw a baseball right now. So I've been playing first base instead of center field. Anyway, I had this crazy thought. I think it was yesterday or this morning, which was, my right arm is so jacked up at this point, and my left arm works fine. Yes. Can I learn how to throw a baseball with my left arm? And I brought it up to like my physical therapist, and she was like, it's an interesting idea. She was like, you got to start doing things you got to start brushing with your left hand. You got to start eating with your left hand. And she was like, and all this PT we're doing for your right shoulder and elbow, you need to start doing it for your left too, to just like establish that stability. She was like, and then if you want, over the off season, like we could just document it. It'd be kind of a fun thing to do on Instagram if you want to take 4 months trying to figure out. Because I was like, at this point, like, even if I get this arm, my right arm totally healthy, I'm never gonna be like, I was a pitcher in high school. Like I could, Kander men, we don't have a lot of like physical gifts, but we can throw hard. Yeah, and I don't have that anymore.
You have.
Why not just try with the left?
It's a great story, even if you fail.
And I'm not remotely ambidextrous, dude. Like it's not like I am all right hand, right foot, right.
I think you have to do it. And what was it I saw that's relevant to this? Oh yeah, there's an Amazon Prime. There's a docu-series. By the way, I'm the king of the docu-series in case anybody's wondering. But there's I have a docu-series for everything. There's like a tweet for everything. They follow the Nadal Tennis Academy, which is this high school that he's built in Mallorca. There's a girl who severely injures her dominant arm in tennis and plays the rest of the season with the other arm and trains with it. And it's really interesting to watch how she does it. She doesn't become like as competitive as she was, but she still has fun playing.
And look, I just need to be able to get the ball back into the infield. I'm not a pitcher, so like, I don't know, but it means if I'm going to document it, I'm going to have to be okay with, I'm going to look ridiculous for probably the whole time, if not the majority, the ideal would be the majority. And then eventually it looks normal. But like when I even try and think about throwing with my left hand, my brain just like, it doesn't, I can't even really.
It'll lead to
anyway, it's an interesting idea.
By throwing with your left
maybe
hand,
so.
Unpack all this new, like the neurons are going to start connecting that haven't connected before, and you'll be like,
what's interesting is it's not like I'm worried about being able to catch with my right. Like if I have to start wearing a glove in my right hand, like I really ought to be able to catch with my dominant hand. So then just throw with the left.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Well, This has been fun. Remember to subscribe to Majority 54 wherever you listen to audio podcasts. Just search Majority 54 and please leave a 5-star review. Ravi, good luck in the Pura Vida Open this weekend. And thank you to the Meidas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.